Hello everyone and welcome today to PISA Presents with Echinoderms, the origins and fossils of our spiny cousins. So let us begin, shall we? Ooh, there's one right there. Well, what was he exactly? What is an echinoderm? Now, the word echinoderm, or phylum Echinodermata, really to be proper here, comes from the Greek echinos, meaning hedgehog, and derma, meaning skin. Now, if it's a reference to their often pebbly or spiny skin, so the group includes such luminaries as the riddle stars, the crinoids, the sand dollars, a sea cucumber, and I'm sorry, but there's no way to not make that look like a turd, so that's why I hid it in the corner, to be perfectly honest. The sea urchin, and of course, Starro the Conqueror, the starfish. Now, you have so many other species. There's just over 7,000 species living today and over 13,000 species in the fossil record. So there's so many echinoderms to just study and really fascinate yourself with. And so many of them really don't even look like poop. So let's go look at a couple of them. Like these right here. Echinoderms are well known for usually having fivefold radial symmetry. They're also aquatic, being found along multiple levels of the ocean floor and shoreline. Because of that, they've had many methods of feeding throughout history. So you're talking about, like, say, filter feeding, predators, like different methods of feeding because they've been in different parts of the water column, more or less. Now, echinoderms are also known for having a water vascular system, which is an internal hydraulic system used for movement, nutrient distribution, and also respiration. Here it is shown in this starfish and also the sea urchin. And also here too, obviously, with these illustrations, you can see some of the other bits and bobs in these various organisms. But altogether, here is a closer look at said uh, system right there. Now, some of these terms are ones that you may see in literature and online, so that's why I'm mentioning them. So, the madreporite is a plate on top of the echinoderm that regulates fluid pressure. Now, that leads to the stone canal, and then in turn, the ring canal. Then you have radial canals, each which goes into one of the typically five segments of the creature. So, you can see on the left, it's kind of like in that sort of the light blue color. Now there are several additional parts to this vascular system as well, but still these are absolutely essential to the function of these animals. Now right here we just have a close-up of some of the crinoids, one of the more famous of the echinoderms. Just absolutely gorgeous animals. These are fossils, as you can tell, but this right here is not. This is a sea urchin. It is a dead one, but still, this is a sea urchin. Now you can see its outer skeleton, all those little wee lumps and bumps. Now those are individual plates of calcitic material called ossicles. Now echinoderms are absolutely covered in them for protection, and when joined tightly together, so fused together, the entire structure, like that right there, is called a test. Now, we have also found preserved echinoderm teeth, and so those fossils, same situation, calcite. So you may be asking yourself, so all of this calcite, does that help the fossil record for echinoderms? And yes, you're thinking, right, it definitely does. So all that calcite, it actually enhances the fossil record for echinoderms very much, and it has made them very important, what are called index fossils. Now, an index fossil is something that, say, you have Echinoderm species A. Now, oftentimes, species A, while they are found in many diverse habitats, these species are still only found in, say, a certain location under certain environmental conditions. And so when you find that species A, you know that that rock satisfied at that particular time that those particular location, that particular condition. So it's basically a snapshot of geologic time, almost a cheat sheet in a way, for paleontologists to tell an environment by finding one of those particular fossils. So let's look at a couple more examples of fossil echinoderms and pretty much how they came into being. But in order to do that, we're going to have to kind of look at the complicated part first, which is, well, kind of trying to figure out just exactly they got here, which, in truth, we don't know. You see, paleontologists can't really agree when and how echinoderms evolved. There's a lot of argument about this. They first appeared over 520 million years ago during the Cambrian. Some people say that they possibly arose even upwards of 600 million years ago. And as it can get pretty contentious, trust me, it's definitely very contentious, and that would have been a whole different presentation in itself. Let's just agree that people will always disagree. There's about a solid half a dozen species that basically get like the prize, so to speak, of the earliest echinoderm, and then even within itself, each has its own sort of ups and downs. So instead of getting that complicated and just making this for the sake of simplicity, let's just look at a couple of cute chicks instead, okay? And a couple additional really cute fossils, or in this case, protostomes. So organisms are sometimes, well, not sometimes, they are, organisms are divided into protostomes or deuterostomes. Now, the difference is whether or not basically the mouth or the anus develops individually. The key opening when you're an embryo, does the first opening develop into a mouth or an anus? So now these two groups of organisms split off many, many millions of years ago. So the first group, the protostomes, are the invertebrates, which are, you can see these worms right here. Now the second group, the deuterostomes, now back many, 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 many years ago, there was a bilateral ancestor. So this bilateral ancestor then gave rise to the chordates, the echinoderms, and keep in mind that we're the chordates, another group called hemichordata, and also too an extinct group of organisms. So that means that despite 500 million years of evolution dividing the essential look of us, although I think we all know somebody that looks kind of a little bit like a sea cucumber, that still means that we are among the echinoderms' closest living relatives, which is actually, I think that is pretty darned interesting. Now, so that doesn't mean that we always knew what the fossils were. Aristotle here loved echinoderms, loved them. Now, that was a pretty common thing back in his day, still. Now, in his honor, we actually named the mouth parts of some sea urchins Aristotle's lantern. You have a close-up of one of them on the right. Now, in his time, people had some interesting, shall I say, ideas about echinoderm fossils. So pretty much if a fossil was the shape of a certain bodily organ, it was thought that it was able to treat disorders inherent to that organ. So say if you had a sea urchin fossil that was the shape of an eyeball, then they would grind it up into a powder, and a person that had, say, eye issues were supposed to drink that powder, and then allegedly, again, I am not recommending this, that is definitely not sound medical advice, and you would be, hey, you can get your sight back. Obviously, that does not work. That is not true, but still, it's what a lot of people thought back then during that time, and for quite some time, fossil echinoderms were actually considered sort of like a folk medicine. Now, how did they really start to spread about? Because obviously during the Cambrian you had a few species, but still during the Ordovician there is a huge biodiversification event that was called Gobi, or the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, because people love their anagrams. Now, so during this time, an amazing 21 different classes or clades of echinoderms evolved. Now, this came about because, as you can see with how the continents are arranged here, you had all this space, all of this water everywhere, filter feeders and suspension feeders got very big, and lots of different methods of feeding, and the water column got big. So say, just to throw out, a shot in the dark here, if you had a particular group of organisms that lived in all different types of the water column, then, well, they would have a chance to really spread out, right? So yeah, that's why the echinoderms got to be so popular during this time. Now, their diversity has since gradually declined, and the only clades that are around today are the ones that survived the end Permian mass extinction. Now, here you have some early echinoderms. Now, obviously, these are not exactly the same resemblance or look that we have today, but still baby steps. And I mean, the Cambrian is quite a few baby steps away from today, but still, over time. Blastoids are a very, very common and important fossil. You can find them in all sorts of different places, and here is a lovely assemblage of some of them. Now, here are some brittle stars or serpent stars. They go by several different names. The word serpent star is a reference to the arms and how they go about like a serpent or a snake. And then here's a close-up of some right there. Now, crinoids. So now, a lot of times when people get fossils, and so say you look at something like that, people don't always look at that and they think, oh, like that's a neat fossil. That's the type of thing that I want to collect. But keep in mind that that fossil on the left, that fossil, that crinoid, so that cup or the calyx, the part on the top, is just as an important fossil as all the bits and pieces that compose the stem of it. Now, in all of those parts, those two, they can separate after death, and still, those also are characteristic in many ways of each individual species. So that still, each and every one of those pieces can tell you a lot about the organism and their environment. So just because you find like a tiny little piece like that, don't count yourself out or feel disappointed. These are pretty interesting finds. So sand dollars you have right here. Now, and again, I'm sorry, I cannot just, yeah, let's go past that sea cucumber. That just looks weird. Now, sea urchins, much, much lovelier fossils in my opinion. That one in the lower right that is not AI. That is an actual fossil right there. Isn't it weird that you have to say that nowadays? But yes. And then here is a close-up of some sea urchin fossils with some rather large spines that are quite interesting and somewhat dangerous looking. And then we'll close up today with a look into a fossil of Euasterella, a very early starfish. So thank you very much, folks, for joining us today at this look with our distant kin, the echinoderms. So thank you for joining and have a lovely